This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture.
Welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. I am very excited today to be with Danielle Krischik. She is a partner and chief strategy officer for the Knight Agency. She is also a speaker, author, and podcaster. Her podcast, The Story Effect, is an outstanding podcast on the impact and power of story. She loves to interview and has done a great job interviewing so many diverse and interesting people, from CEOs to neuroscientists to authors to frontline workers. She's got a great gift for capturing authentic stories that inspire connection and performance. We met at the Purpose Summit in Charlotte, and I was super impressed, Danielle, with you and your work and your podcasts. And it was very appropriate that your most recent podcast was on this theme of culture with Brandon West, which was fantastic. So today we're going to talk about the fact that storytelling isn't just stories and communication, but it's really how culture is built and sustained. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. And that was a very generous introduction. I appreciate it very much.
Well, you do great work. And, I've always been fascinated with this topic of storytelling. As an Irish person, I'm supposed to be really good at it. Sometimes I'm not so sure, but I know how profoundly we as humans respond to stories and how communicating through stories creates much more lasting memories than data and information. But, I'd love to hear and have you share a little bit more, Danielle, with us about your passion, your own story, and your passion for storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to point out, I just had Ken Hughes on my podcast. He wrote a book called Tailor Making. It's all about the phenomenon of Taylor Swift and her ability to connect with an audience. And he is Irish and in Ireland. And he told me that it is an entire storytelling culture. In fact, when you meet somebody, you probably know this, when you meet somebody on the street, you say, "Hey, what's your story?" And that's their way of saying, like, "Hi, how are you doing?" So I was fascinated to hear that. I thought it was so cool. And I baited him because I'm like, is storytelling a thing in Ireland? He's like, "Is it a thing? It's everything," so very, very cool. But I have always been interested in human behavior. Since I was very little, I just remember being fascinated by the way that humans interact with each other and how we understand each other, who gets along with who is an influencer back before there were even influencers, just who are the popular kids in school, all of those things. I've always been fascinated by that. And I went to college for advertising and public relations because of the psychology side of it, because I think advertising is fascinating to me, because if you tell the right story, people will grab their wallets, show up to the Apple store, stand in line for hours, and spend $1,000 on a phone. And they didn't even do a tech comparison with a Samsung phone. They just heard the story connected them, right? So that has always fascinated me. So I started my career there. I was a copywriter. And the cool thing about that is you get to figure out how to tell an entire story in a billboard that is 6 words or less. So that really kind of trained me. How do you capture people's attention? So fast forward, after that kind of leg of my career of traditional advertising copywriting, I stumbled upon this agency in downtown Orlando, Knight Agency. And I was initially brought on as a contractor to do more kind of copywriting, traditional stuff. And then we got the opportunity to do a internal campaign. So Starwood Hotels and Resorts, you probably know them from the Sheraton, the Westin, the W. So we set out to interview 100 people from 100 countries. And they flew me to Dubai. It was my first time out of the country, by the way. So what a heck of a journey for your first time.
Big time out of the country, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was massive. And, I got over there, and the people that sat in front of me were from all walks of life, different cultures, different backgrounds. I mean, just unique and interesting people that didn't look like me, didn't talk like me. I mean, you can imagine. And I'm sitting there asking my standard tell me about your career. Why do you love the company? All of those testimonial type stuff. But early on, I'm kind of a rebel, Tim. So early on in the conversations, I thought, we're going to get personal. You seem like you're an overcomer. Tell me something you've overcome. And people were opening up. Every single person opened up and gave me a personal story. And I sat there and thought to myself, if people knew what this leader was really about and what they've gone through and why they are who they are, they would run through walls for this leader. They would love this leader. And it just kept going on and on and on. And I thought, okay, we're missing it when we just stick to these testimonials. I love this company. I've been here 13 years. Nobody cares. Your personal story is everything because it's all about human connection.
Now, a curious question, Danielle, since I am a Bonvoy member and every time I check in, they have the TV on with my name on it, which is nice, but they have all those stories of all over the world. Was that what you were working on?
Oh, not on the customer side, but probably early on, you might have seen some stories that we captured of their team. Yeah.
Yeah, the people that work there. That was the original version, and it's kind of drifted.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. All right.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, it's very well done. Very well done. So, we're talking about culture. We're talking about leaders. How would you encourage or suggest leaders use storytelling to build trust and alignment inside their organizations?
Yeah. So big question. I'm going to try to not ramble too much, but...
Oh, you're okay. It's a lot to unpack there.
I did write an entire book on this because almost 50,000 words on this, because what is out there now, I believe, is, leaders need to become better storytellers. And certainly that is true. But also, leaders need to become better story enablers. And leaders need to help people find their story within the company story. And I'll explain what that means. So the way that leaders should think about storytelling is in a quadrant of, there's 4 parts. You want to connect people at work, but you want to connect them to the company itself so that they wear the t-shirt, they feel pride to work there, they love where they work. You want to connect people to the work itself. So the stuff on their desk, how can they be personally engaged and connected to that? You want to connect people with the leader themselves. So, do I trust my leader? Do we understand each other, right? And then you want to connect people to each other. And you can do that with different types of storytelling. And it's not all on the leader to tell the story. And I can get into kind of techniques and how those different story types work. But that is initially how you want to think about it.
That's really interesting because of the 4 things you just said there, I think most people are familiar with 3 of them. And again, I think about the podcast you just did with Brandon West. So I will ask you a follow-up question. How do you see people effectively helping people get connected to their work? I think people, inherently, if the culture is healthy, the values are aligned, people can get connected to one another. And you talked about this in previous podcasts around culture, which is all the fun stuff, which, that's not culture necessarily that contributes to it. But I'm very curious, how do you see people effectively connecting their employees to the work they do every day?
Yeah, I love that you pulled that one out specifically because that's probably the least understood. And when people on a Monday morning, they're kind of getting themselves ready for work and they're grabbing their coffee and they say, ugh, back to the grind. The reason they feel that way, the grind is a series of whats without whys. So the way you connect people to their work is you give them the why behind the what. Now, Simon Sinek has been down this road talking about the why and why it's important. What I'm talking about specifically, though, is the story of the why. So let me give you a great example. We recently got a new client at night, and it was a small project at first. It was just a kind of look at our brochure. Is there anything we can kind of update and give us some suggestions on how we can go out into the marketplace a little bit better? I got the team together and we did a kickoff call. I could have very easily made that meeting 5 minutes and said, all right, guys, we need a brochure. Think about the design, take a look at what they have, and here are the pillars of the story that you need to hit. Let me know if you have any questions, right? That's work. That's like, oh, okay, I got to go back and I got to do this. Hopefully they like it. But I told them a story about the group that we were working for, the client. I told them, because I was privileged to go to one of their events. I spoke at one of their leadership academies. And I said, if you could meet these people, they are all heart, all hustle. They have each other's backs. They show up for each other for personal things, not just for business opportunities. And I kind of went in and I told them the story of who these people are and why I believe so much. And so, we want to attract new members to join this organization because they really do change people's lives. And I gave them examples of how they change people's lives. The entire team was so insanely kind of connected and rooting for this client. They went above and beyond. Our designer walked away and worked on it over the weekend. I mean, leaders talk about, I just wish my team would give a little discretionary effort. I didn't have to ask for that. Like, he just went away and he went above and beyond. He not only designed the brochure, but he created what a website would look like and what giveaways would look like and T-shirts and everything. He just went nuts, right? Well, fast forward, the client was thrilled and signed a new statement of work to do more with us, right? I mean, so the why behind the what is so important. And when you're thinking about connecting people with the work, think about it in terms of the moment. Like, every day they're going to attack something on their desk. How can you engage them differently? Give them the why behind the what. Give them the story.
So that kind of opens up another interesting question. So what you did with your team was, and obviously you had to invest the time to get to know these people. So this was more of a relational engagement than a transactional engagement. But there's something you said there, Danielle, that I think is really powerful is this wasn't a project for your team that was going to help them meet their numbers necessarily. This was you connecting your people to the people that they were going to do a project for and the impact those people had in their work. So you pretty much said it, but unpack a little bit of the nuance of getting people connected to people and not numbers. Because again, business, such a driving metrics, numbers, got to hit the numbers, got to do this. I'm thinking honestly about our own business right now and how of the 4 things you talked about, I think we've done a great job with 3 of them, but not getting people connected to the work. And I think too often our story is about the numbers. So how do you kind of get away from that, recognizing the business still needs to hit its metrics?
Yeah. So there's always a story behind the numbers is the easy answer to that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. We did a really, really fun town hall for a construction company. And it was the very first interview on my podcast, by the way, a leader that I absolutely admire. And they were coming up on this town hall, and they're a very data-driven organization. They have an entire software where they can track day-to-day, minute-to-minute supply numbers and jobs and progress, and everything has a number attached. So we created an entire town hall for all the leadership to get up in front of the organization and just post a number on the screen and then tell the story behind the number. And sure enough, there is a story behind every number, even if it's profit, right? Even if you're going out in front of your organization and you're saying, we were 20% higher than we were last year. What does that mean? Why do you care? Why is that important to you? Why is that important to the people in front of you? There is always a story. You can humanize even a number.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I think that's the story behind the number makes the number more relevant. So again, there's some rich things you're sharing here. I mean, how about just when you think about practical applications, how would you encourage leaders, again, in the context of you're really trying to shift potentially a culture or tell a better story about your culture, obviously a true story about your culture, and what are some, I guess, for lack of a better word, Danielle, how-tos?
Yeah. So first thing, if leaders listening to this are thinking, that's cute, but I don't have time. I don't have time to do that because I have KPIs I've got to hit. I don't have time. you do have time because you communicate with your team. Anytime you have an opportunity to communicate, you have an opportunity to be a storyteller or enable people to share stories, right? So you do have time. And what you don't have time for is to let someone go, find new talent, onboard them, get them up to speed, right? That's incredibly more time than what I'm talking about. So I want to just punch that in the face right now.
More time consuming, yeah, and stressful.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing is when a leader is thinking about storytelling in general, one of the pushbacks is, well, I don't want to talk about myself and, I don't like put myself out there. And, well, it's not about you. Storytelling is in service to your team. And by the way, you're not going to lose business acumen if you make yourself more human. In fact, the opposite, you will become one of those leaders that people will run through a wall for. That is how this works. So, couple of kind of like lay down the law up front. From a practical standpoint, think about all the touch points, all the times that you have an opportunity to communicate. It's your stand-ups, your town halls, your one-on-ones. Those are all moments where you can share a story. If your organization has a newsletter, I'm not suggesting that leaders take on a part-time job and become writers by any means, but pick up the phone, call the comms department and say, I know you're about to put out your next one. I have a great story for you. My team just absolutely killed it on this assignment. They nailed it. The client's super happy. Like, it's a big win for our organization. I just thought I'd share that. The comms team will send you flowers and candy for giving them a great story. Trust me. But anytime you have an opportunity to communicate, you have an opportunity to storytell or story share. In your one-on-ones, start with the first 5 minutes of, hey, we haven't gotten to know each other. Tell me something about your kids, your pets, or your passion. That's a really easy one, right? Watch the face and the body language of the person on the other side. It's like getting the greatest gift in the world. Oh my gosh, my leader wants to know me a little bit. Like, how special is that? All of a sudden, the heart opens. There's more trust, greater connection, right? So that's a small one. For a leader to share a story, think about the years of experience that you have before you became a leader, right? So projects that you've succeeded at, projects that you completely bombed, share your epic fail moments. People absolutely love that. Love that. It humanizes you. And then ultimately share a little bit about yourself. You don't have to get completely open kimono and uncomfortably vulnerable, but do you have a dog? Are you into sports? The more you can humanize yourself. And again, this takes minutes before a meeting. It takes minutes in the hallway. Those are all little kind of ways. And there's a whole ecosystem that you can explore to infuse storytelling. It's not a one and done. It's a culture of storytelling. So you think about it as infusing this into every day, all the time, wherever you can.
So this is going to kind of be an odd question of sorts. Is this something that needs to be taught or just to be intentional about, or both?
I think that's an amazing question because both. I think that there are master classes, there are stacks of books out there on how to become a better storyteller, a better listener, all of those things. So you can certainly learn how to do it. But I think the most important thing is to be intentional with it. Be yourself, be authentic, be raw, be real, and be intentional. And do it your way. I really admire when, master storytellers come out and say, follow the hero's journey. That's a great formula for telling a story. And it is, by the way. But you don't even have to put that pressure on yourself. You're already a storyteller. In my book, I went down this rabbit hole of science, neuroscience, and history. Standing here today, every single one of us is a storyteller. It goes back to our ancestors, and it's part of how our brain works because our brain uses narratives to interpret the world. And I'll give you a little example of that. So you've probably been out late, right? One night, you've had some fun with your friends and you're out late and you're walking back to your car and it's dark. And, you're thinking about safety in that moment, right? As you're looking around to the people kind of on the street near you, you're making up a story of every single one of them. Ooh, that girl had some fun tonight, right? Or you're looking over, oh, that's a big guy. I better keep walking just in case. Or, oh, that couple is about to get in an argument. You're making up all these stories. So you already are a storyteller. So I would say, yes, you can learn it, but definitely be intentional and practice. And don't take it on like you all of a sudden have to get up and become Shakespeare. You can do this in little micro moments throughout your day.
Yeah, I figured you would say that. I mean, I think the intentionality is a key thing. As I was listening to you, I remember years ago, I was asked to speak to a group of my peers. And the general theme would be get up there and kind of talk about your conquests and your successes. And I told the person that asked me, I said, I'll do it on one condition. And they're like, what's that? And I said, I'm going to talk about my failures because these were newer leaders and I wanted them to learn from my failures. And the guy was like, are you sure you want to do that? That's kind of odd. And I said, no. If I'm going to do this, that's what I'm going to do. So I did it. And to this day, I mean, this was over a decade ago. I know some of the people that were there that day. They were like, that completely helped me, make better decisions as a leader after that. Because, people remember stories a lot longer than, to your point, they're going to remember data. So you touched on something that I think is really important that is easily overlooked. And I am curious about this, Danielle. In your example of us telling ourselves stories, that's a very impactful reality that I'm not sure most people are aware of, the stories we tell ourselves. As a leader, who's trying to build great culture and connect with people, what do you see as some of the ways that as a leader you can tell your story to yourself?
I love that you went there. This is how I end my book because I start with thinking about other people and thinking about the company, right? And then I back into what it does for you. There is no greater way to connect to yourself than to get clear on what you care about, what your values are, your own story. And it's funny, people are, especially hard-charging, high-performing people, they're afraid to face their own story and own their story, especially if they've had loss, they've had not so great background because, I don't want to revisit that and open those wounds and I don't want to expose that. And you don't have to, by the way, but just becoming very introspective, understanding in the deepest way who you are, not only helps you then face the world in a different way, but it helps you enable other people to understand themselves better. And you build a skill there. But it is so important to own your story and realize that you're holding the pen and you can write today's chapter today. So I would say it's a lot of introspection, quiet thinking. I know everyone's going to make fun of this. Journaling. I know that seems so woo-woo, right?
I talk about it a lot, Danielle. I do it every day, almost every day. So
I love that. Because tell me, honestly, when you're journaling and you're really thinking about whatever it is you're thinking about that day, don't you come to these incredible insights and realizations about yourself?
Yeah, no, I get incredibly rich insights. And as we were talking about that, what struck me when you were talking about the stories we tell ourselves, I had a situation working with a business coach a couple of years ago, and we were talking about the story of my family of origin, which I had candidly kind of a negative slant on. And he felt that was impacting me as a leader in a variety of different ways. And so he said, your homework is I want you to rewrite that story in a positive way. And he says, I'm not asking you to change the facts. I'm not asking you to rewrite the story, but how could you put your family of origin story in a positive light versus a negative light? And I was like, interesting. And I did it. And it was absolutely the most liberating thing in the sense that I was able to truly see that upbringing in a much more, and it was true. I mean, that's the beauty of it. I didn't rewrite the story. I just looked at the positive aspects of the adversity that I faced and who that made me as a person and a leader. And previously, I was using that story in a negative way, in essence, to talk about the challenges I was having as a leader. And so I just figured I'm going to take a little sidebar here because I think that's something I've learned. I learned from that experience. And since then, my business partner and I talk about this. She's challenged me to rewrite the story on a couple of things that I have from a business perspective seen. And it really is liberating because I think what we find, or what I found, Danielle, back to your point about journaling, which is how I process my thoughts. And, I think it works well for some people and maybe not for others. Works well for me, how I process my thoughts. But usually the stories that we tell ourselves, or I'll say I tell myself, are not positive, back to your example. And they're things that I have no control over. Yet if I look at the story through the lens of, what choice do I have? What is in my sphere of control here? And I reshape the story around that. It's unbelievably liberating as to what you can free yourself up for.
Oh, Tim, I love that you just shared that.
Yeah. Yeah. Little side.
I love people need to hear that so deeply, because if you do this, the real work, it feels like you're shot out of a cannon. All of a sudden, you feel differently about yourself, which makes you feel differently about the world around you and your work and the people working with you. It is so incredibly, and that's why I kind of ended with it, because it's sort of like a gift with purchase. When you work on this whole storytelling thing, it really has this effect on you. And the deeper you go with yourself, the better a leader you are, the better you show up for your people. Absolutely. I love that you did that. I love it.
Yeah. No, it's been great. There was something you said earlier, Danielle, as well, that I think was super powerful. I want to go back to, and that is not just telling your story as a leader, but engaging other people in their stories. I'll unpack that a little bit more, because I think that's, again, a kind of a lost art, is getting people to tell their story. I mean, I think it's fair to say people like to hear stories, but they really like to hear their story.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It's so true. But here's the thing. Companies and often leaders, they're very well aware they have employees, but they forget they have people. And I can attest to this because I've interviewed thousands of people from all walks of life. Every single person walking through that door that day has a story. They're carrying something. They've been through something. And I'm not suggesting, don't take it here, audience, I'm not suggesting it becomes a therapy session or whatever. But what I am saying is, when leaders take the time to understand the people on their team, first of all, it is incredibly valuable for people themselves, because they feel he cares about me, she cares about me. I'm seen at this place. I'm not just employee number 45, but I am a real person with real challenges. And it's so incredibly important to do that. That's the kumbaya side. On the business side, there is no greater way to connect people than for a leader to get to know their people on a human level. You know their resume already. You looked at it when you hired them, but that's what describes them. But what defines them? Get to know kind of what makes them tick, a little bit about their families. And here's the gift with purchase in this, okay? A leader will learn things about their team that they will never learn on an engagement survey. Never learn these insights on an engagement survey or a pulse survey or any of that, because they'll get to know what makes people tick. The beautiful thing in that is when you need to motivate, when you're in the trenches and it's tough and you've got to get your team to jump, you understand them on that personal level, and you can do that. All right, I'm in. Let's go. Let's do this. We're all in this together, right? It is critically important. This type of connection is not just feel good. It leads to business results. 42% of your team will be less likely to leave if they have this level of personal connection with their leader.
Well, and that kind of brings up another point. I mean, we are obviously in a relatively divisive society right now, at a very interesting time in our overall societal trend. We won't go down that trail today, but when you look at the future of work and leadership, and you kind of answered this question, but how do you see storytelling playing a role in that? And again, a healthy culture and leadership.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more important than ever, especially with the wave of AI and how fast it's coming in, and it has capability to tell story, but it can't tell human story, right? I think it's going to become more important than ever. We do have, you're probably sick of hearing this on every podcast, but the loneliness epidemic. I mean, people are really lonely. And the anecdote to that is connection, human connection. And storytelling is the way to do it. Storytelling turns a stranger in the hallway to Bob with a small dog and a Yankees fan, right? Those are such surface level facts, but automatically you just got a sense of a person, right? And by the way, lack of storytelling, people will make up stories anyways.
Oh, yeah. There's always a story.
Yeah, there's always a story, right? Oh, Danielle always wears black.
Nature abhors a vacuum. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's okay because that's how our brain keeps us safe. We scan the room and we figure everything out and we've got a story, right? But it is going to become more important than ever. It's too easy to leave a company these days because, oh, I got, $10 more an hour down the street, so I'm going over there. What is going to get your people to stay? Because attrition, as you know, is expensive, right? So just that alone, if all it did was keep people staying, growing, being happy and productive at your organization, if that's all storytelling did, you win. You win. So I really believe that the future is going to really require more of this human connection through storytelling.
Well, I think you said a couple things there that I do want to call out as really, I think, impactful. One is storytelling is relational, and too much of our society is becoming transactional. Your point about I'm going to get more money here, so I'll just transactionally go for the more money and not consider the relational disruption in your life. I know there was a study Gallup did years ago that, people that had a friend at work were much more likely to stay in that workplace and engaged than if they did not. And clearly, if we don't have a personal connection, it's hard to have a friend. So that's, I think, something very important. The other thing you said that really struck me, Danielle, is, people talk about engagement surveys and PS scores and all that stuff, but it would be a very different conversation to have an employee explain through a story of what it's like to work here at this XYZ company and what their work is like. As a leader, that's going to tell you a lot. Back to my question is, how do you get people connected to the work? Well, have them tell you a story about their work to find out if they are or are not connected to their work and what difference it makes. So I think that's another very powerful thing, definitely, to take away from our conversation relative to something very practical you can do. You talk about in your book and some of your podcasts, the signature story and having that be somewhat concise. Just maybe share a little bit more about that. Again, that's something I think every leader can do and also help elicit from the people they work with what their signature story is.
So in my book, I talk about 3 little rhymey words that you can remember so that anytime you're telling a story, whether it's your signature story or it's the story of the day, if you remember these 3 things, you will likely tell a story that engages your audience, gets them to, remember something and do something differently at the end. So I talk about captivate, relate, and motivate. And they're rhyming on purpose to help you remember. But, the brain is lazy, so it takes a little bit to wake it up, right? So you want to start your story with something that is captivating. So if you're giving a town hall, like you've been in I'm sure plenty of town halls, Tim, where, you're sitting in the audience and a leader gets up there and it starts off, thank you very much for being here. I just want you to know we exceeded our numbers this quarter. It's like everybody's asleep, right? But if the leader got up there and said, I have to be honest with everyone, I didn't really believe in this company until yesterday. What? You've been a leader here for 10 years. What do you mean you didn't believe in this guy, right? It's like, so everybody leans forward and then you continue. So captivate, relate. The story should not be so high up on a mountain that the people in front of you can't see themselves in it, don't know how to attach to it, can't understand it for themselves, can't interpret it. So relate on a human level. And this is done by getting vulnerable and authentic. So as you move through the story, you can say things like, and then, we got in front of the client, and I'll admit, for the first time in a long time, I was nervous. My palms were sweaty under the table. This hasn't happened to me in a while, so it kind of knocked me off my game. But when I started to speak, right? So like you're relating because you're becoming human. And then motivate. End your story by giving them something to think, feel, or do differently. It could be short-term or long-term. So if it's short-term, it's the next time we meet everybody, I want you to bring 3 wild ideas to the table. Things that will probably never fly, but I just want you to go there. 3 ideas. Okay. That's immediate. Or it could be future. So the next time you're collaborating, just remember that, everybody's coming at it from a different angle. And before you shut ideas down, just be open to the way different people think. That's something you can take with you, though. But either way, you're motivating them to do something differently. So captivate, relate, motivate. Very easy to remember.
CRM. That's awesome. Client relationship manager, CRM. That's how I captivate, relate, motivate. Well, we've unpacked a lot of great stuff here today, Danielle, and I really appreciate you being with us. What's a good way for people to connect with you? And we'll put all that in the show notes, but just where are you most likely to show up, whether it's social media or your book? Maybe mention your book and the workshops you do.
Yeah, so my podcast is The Story Effect, and it's on everywhere, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. My book is also The Story Effect because I'm building an entire platform about this. And that will be coming out November 21st, which happens to be the day my mom passed away. So it's giving her a little bragging rights on her day, which I think is very cool, special. And I have a website, thestoryeffect.com, and I love to connect with people. So if you want to talk about storytelling at your organization or be on my podcast and have a great conversation or any of those things, definitely reach out to me there and I will respond personally.
Well, thank you. That's awesome, Danielle. I think that's a wrap for today for another episode of Winning Through Culture. Really appreciate Danielle's time with us today. Definitely reach out to her. We did. We had a chance to meet at the Purpose Summit, and just again, really appreciate you being with us here today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful,
because your culture matters.